Hi, this is Muho. I want to upload the next part of the My Teacher's House series. This time I'm gonna upload the last part of the second chapter, the Trump of Zen and a Delicate Flower, or the other way around, a Delicate Flower and the Trump of Zen. The last part is about the question how my teacher and my teacher's teacher got along, and why my teacher's teacher chose my teacher as his successor, which of course for me is, well, difficult to judge because at the time I wasn't here yet, but later was witness of a conflict between my teacher and my teacher's teacher, which I will also talk about later in this series. So thinking back, well, one question is, well, why did Watanabe Roshi, my teacher's teacher, decide that Miyaula Roshi, who's my teacher, should be the 8th abbot of Antaiji? Maybe this time again I read a little bit from the text. How did Miyaula get along with Watanabe? Miyaula is my teacher, Watanabe is his teacher. Did he look up to him? I think in the beginning it was okay. It could be that he was looking up to him, but that there was an unspoken stress as well. He was one of the original Watanabe students who made it easy for him to deal with Uchiyama's people. The new students were unconditionally loyal, while the old ones would resist. So, I don't know anything much about American Zen, but maybe it was, for example, the same after Shunryu Suzuki died and Richard Baker became his student, but a lot of the original Shunryu Suzuki students didn't look up to Richard Baker as their teacher. And I think that happens in maybe all sanghas. When one teacher retired, the former students of those teacher might not look up to their former Dharma brother that becomes then the new leader of the sangha as their teacher. So that might make it quite difficult for the new teacher if he's surrounded by his former Dharma brothers and sisters who don't accept him as the teacher and how they have their own ideas of how the place should be run and everything. So again, back to the question Edward asks, was he particularly close to Watanabe? So was my teacher particularly close to my teacher's teacher? I answer, I have the feeling he was not the very closest. There was another guy who was probably the closest. He was like a cult follower. He left after 7 or 8 years because there was a priest in Hiroshima who was building a new temple and needed a priest. He asked Watanabe if he could have one of Antaiji's monks. So Watanabe said, of course, choose whoever you want. He picked the top guy, the one closest to Watanabe. Watanabe let him go for whatever reason, I don't know. Because, well, that person was probably very important for Watanabe to run Antaiji at the time. If this guy hadn't left, I'm sure he would have made him abbot, because that was the person he trusted the most. He was involved in Watanabe's conflict with Miyaula much later on. He was often used by Watanabe as a communicator to Miyaula. He was my teacher's senpai, so senior. But age-wise and practice-wise, they were not so far from each other. He wasn't a super smart guy, but he had a university education and could read books. He was a bit more intellectual than Miyaula. My teacher, of course, could read books, but he had only high school education, and it was not a top-level high school, but more of a kind of high school that aimed at training the students to do practical jobs later. So my teacher was kind of an exception among the Antaiji monks. Most of them had college education and were more in an intellectual vein. Miyaura was more a practical guy. How long was Watanabe in Hyogo? He was here for 10 years after having been in charge of Antaiji for 2 years in Kyoto. With Watanabe, why were the 30 people that moved to Hyogo expected to stay for 10 years? It was just a philosophy from Uchiyama: sit silently for the first 10 years, then another 10 years, and finally 10 years more. That's from the final words at Antaiji. You can find that on the Antaiji homepage. If you go to Dharma and click, you will find it somewhere. Uchiyama's final words at Antaiji. 7 points for practice at Antaiji. And it's one of those points. First sit for 10 years, another 10 years, and finally another 10 years. That's something he said at his retirement speech in 1975. But when Uchiyama himself became abbot of Antaiji, that was less than 25 years after being ordained by Sawaki. So you should not take those 30 years too literally. The same with Watanabe. When he became the abbot of Antaiji, he had been ordained and practiced as a monk for, I think, 13 or 14 years, less than 15 years. So he had done his first 10 years, but he was still in the second decade. A lot of Uchiyama's students got transmission after 4 or 5 years. It wasn't that they stayed with him for 10 years. Most left earlier. But then there were others who stayed for 15 years at Antaiji. Some stayed for 5 years at Kyoto, then another 10 years at Hyogo. The Italians stayed for 7 years or something. What monks told you when you came was, if you are serious about this, just sit silently for 10 years. But very few of the people who came here actually stayed for 10 years. Uchiyama, Watanabe, my teacher, and myself were the only people who stayed at Antaiji for more than 20 years. And nobody actually stayed for full 30 years at Antaiji. A question. There was also this nun, Joshin Kasai. My answer. She was at Antaiji for a very long time. She was Uchiyama's senior in Kyoto, but didn't live at the temple all year round. Joshin was cooking during sessions when Uchiyama was still abbot. Then she moved into her own house at the new Hyogo temple, but was still traveling. She was quite an independent spirit. Joshin wouldn't participate in Samu or even Zazen, but did Kesa-suing. If some of the monks had a fight with Watanabe, they used her house as a refuge. She was like a mother. Joshin was a strong character and would stand up to the abbot. So she lived at the Kyoto Antaiji and also at the Hyogo Antaiji, but I think she died in 1984. So she wasn't here anymore when my teacher became the abbot. And I never met her in person, but her grave is here on the Antaiji grounds. Other than Miyaura, was there anyone else who died at Antaiji? Yes, there was a young Japanese novice who was going to be ordained, but he was crushed in an avalanche during spring in 1983. That was, I think, February 18th or 19th of 1983. Also, before I came to Antaiji. But when my 3 Italian seniors were practicing here in the winter. Why did Watanabe choose Miyaura as his successor? Around 1986, Watanabe decided he wanted to go to Italy to bring Antaiji style to Europe. Some of his students had already left by that time. There were other people who were just small characters, subordinates. I think Watanabe saw Miyaura as the only one who could stand on his own feet. He thought he would protect the place. So Watanabe left with his 3 Italian students in 1987, and only my teacher and 2 relatively young monks stayed. That's the end of the second chapter. And today I will also upload the first part of the third chapter, which Edward gave the title The Money Problem. I will read the first sentences that Edward writes. Koho Watanabe's dream of creating a self-sustainable monastery came at a cost, several $1 million. The amount the Kyoto property was sold for was, according to Muho Nölke, some 4 million, which today would be around 80 million. I didn't check the number in today's money, but it's the number I heard that at the time it was in yen, it would be 400 yon oku. What much is that? 400 million? I think it would be 400 million yen, which would be probably approximately $4 million. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But, well, a good amount of money that they got for selling the property in Kyoto. A sizable sum. At the new location in Hyogo, the land residence building and meditation hall cost somewhere between 1 million and 2 million. We still have all the bookkeeping around here, so it's all in there somewhere. A large portion of the rest was used on machinery, vehicles, equipment, materials to build the mountain dam, and farm animals, as well as a few horses with the leftover money. By the time Shinyu Miyaura took over in the mid-1980s, 1987 to be exact, Watanabe had spent almost everything, believing it was no good for Antaji's future as a Buddhist community being attracted to money. Miyaura thus faced the task of running a dream project, which was realized with 30 people and plenty of cash, with a small sangha and little to no funds. So, well, the project was started with these 30 people and millions of dollars at the time, but after 10 years or so, all of the money was spent and all of the people except 3 had left the monastery. So that's gonna be the content of this chapter. Maybe you read my answer to the first question. What was the issue here with money? Maybe you can read it by yourself. I'm talking about something which is called takuhatsu in Japanese in here. Takuhatsu, I translate it as begging, although some people, maybe especially from America, I don't know about English, maybe it's the same in English, have problems with this word, and they feel that you should rather say something like go on an alms round or asking people for alms, do fundraising. I don't know so much about the connotation of the word takuhatsu. Basically what we are doing when we are begging, I don't know if begging is the proper word, but basically what the Buddha did 2,500 years ago, would go out with his begging bowl or his alms bowl, if people prefer that word. And the traditional way, as we also used to do it 25, 30 years ago when I first came to Antaji, is you go from house to house. You can do it here in the countryside, or what we usually did at the year end, and then again at the end of the winter. We go to Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto, and you would usually aim at shopping arcades, and we go from shop to shop, and we stand for a short while in front of the shop and chant something, and then in most of the cases, the shop owner will go out and put something, donation. Usually it's money. It could also be rice or other food items, but usually it's money today. The owner of the shop will put a small amount of money into the bowl. You bow, chant a small sutra, and then go to the next shop. So that's the traditional way of takuhatsu. And just because you stand in front of the shop doesn't mean that the shop owner is obliged to give you money. But of course, there's a certain proactivity there. I mean, there's still the difference to many Western beggars who kind of approach you and say, hey, I need money, I have nothing to eat, can you give me $1, can you give me $2, or as you're eating a sandwich, can you give me something? We're not as proactive like that, but I mean, when you're standing in front of the shop owner knows, oh, this guy wants money from them, and maybe they're not gonna move before I give them money. And you, as the person who's doing the alms collection, of course know how the shop owner feels. And some of them are actually happy and they say, thank you for coming, thank you for coming, thank you for giving me the opportunity to offer you something. But some of them are also busy, and you can feel, you sense they are annoyed because there's lots of customers and you're standing in the way of the customers. Others are outright kind of, well, annoyed, and kind of they want you to move, and they tell you, move on, don't come here anymore. That's a very small minority. But recently we prefer a different style of takuhatsu, where you just stand at a street corner and you chant the Heart Sutra, for example, and people will pass you by, and some of these people give you money, but nobody feels kind of forced. You don't address people directly. People have the choice to just ignore you and go straight on, and most people actually do that. But then there's also a lot of people who choose to give you a donation and bow. Usually they bow very politely. So that's basically takuhatsu, and I talk about that. And ever since the time of Kyoto Antaiji, people were supporting Antaiji. The monks were trying to get the financial support for Antaiji by going on alms round, by begging in the street, doing takuhatsu. And even after Watanabe Roshi moved the place here to Hyogo, and they tried to become self-sufficient, they never really stopped to do takuhatsu. They always needed the financial support, although they tried to survive also on selling agricultural products, but they never got enough money to survive on that alone. Also, the monks living at Antaiji never got pocket money from the monastery, so all the personal needs needed to be covered by takuhatsu. So, I mean, one question that I think never was clearly answered is, when we say that Antaiji is self-sufficient or aims at self-sufficiency, what do we really mean by that? Do we mean that we grow all of our food products? That would mean quite a lot, but we still need something to wear, we still need electricity. To do agricultural work, we need tools like plows and sickles and spades and stuff like that. Do we also produce these by ourselves? Do we make our own tools? Do we produce our own clothes? If we get sick, is it okay to go to the hospitals, or as self-sufficient people, do we go to the mountain and look for medicine there, for herbs or stuff like that, and try to cure our sickness in a natural way? If we need a nail, do we make the nail by ourselves, where does the iron come from? I don't get the feeling that anybody has really asked themselves this question seriously at any point, although this should be a natural question to ask. When we say we are self-sufficient, well, how far does this get? It seemed to be taken for granted that self-sufficiency never meant much more than trying to grow all of the rice and the vegetables that we need. But people never really made a serious attempt at making their own oil, for example, or producing sugar by themselves. They tried to, they experimented with bees and honey, and it worked for a while, but then the bees were, well, they lost against the hornets, and now we don't have any bees anymore. But, I mean, sugar was always bought, salt was always bought. We could go to the ocean and try to make our own salt, but that also was never an option seriously discussed. If you try to make your own tools and your own clothes and stuff like that, there probably would not be the time to do zazen. Even now, where we only make rice and vegetables ourselves, it's hard to sit the amount of zazen that we do per year, 1,800 hours, and also to take care of the fields and the vegetables. So self-sufficiency at Antaji really never meant much more that we make our own rice, our own vegetables, we make our own miso paste and tofu sometimes. And now when the hunter brings us animals, we slaughter, well, we don't kill the animals, they're usually dead, but we butcher the animals and we eat the meat. And that's, well, as far as it goes. So that means we have to buy oil, we have to buy sugar, we have to buy salt, we have to buy the electricity that we use, we have to buy tools, we have to buy fuel if we want to move the tractor. We have to buy clothes if we want these, if we need these. If you need to go to the doctor, you have to pay for the hospital. So there is quite a good amount of money needed. From my experience, the minimum per year is about $10,000 to just keep things running on a minimum level without really doing much of maintenance for the building. Without thinking about future repairs. Just to pay the bills, you need $10,000, probably more, 15. So the question has always been, where does this money come from? And one answer was takuhatsu, going to the city and asking people for money. And recently, fortunately, people have been also donating to Antaji through PayPal and supporting our work. And I'm grateful for that. Although, in a way, you could say it's a contradiction to self-sufficiency. How can you say you're self-sufficient when you beg in the streets and you ask for money on the internet page? But, well, the fact is we need that money to pay our bills. And, well, this chapter is about the money problem, about one episode, about 2 or 3 years, I would say, in the history of Antaji, where my teacher said, let's get serious with this self-sufficiently thing. Let's stop takuhatsu. No more takuhatsu for Antaji. We do not beg for money. Otherwise, we cannot call ourselves self-sufficient. So I think he was trying to really go through with this vision of Watanabe that Antaji would survive on its own in the mountains. Of course, there are certain things we cannot produce ourselves. We need money for that. So then we should sell the stuff that we can produce or offer other services that people would be paying money for, like yeah, when I came to Antalya 30 years ago, there was a cow, and one part of the income that the monastery was the calf. Every year, the cow would give birth to a calf, and that was sold, and for maybe $2,000, $3,000. So it was not a huge income. That was part of the income. The only reason they had the cow at the time was the idea, well, self-sufficiency. We don't eat the meat ourselves, but we sell it. Other people will eat the cow, so it's not really something that Buddhist monks are supposed to do. But if we aim at self-sufficiency, we need to make compromises. But still, again, there were only $2,000 or $3,000 through the calf. We would sell a small amount of rice, but that were maybe hundreds of dollars that we got from this. We never got even close to this income of $10,000 or $15,000 that we would need to sustain ourselves. And well, 20 years ago also, which Miyawala Roshi said, I leave it up to you how you want to make Antaji self-sufficient, but there's only one condition from now: no more takuhatsu. I don't want you to go to do takuhatsu anymore. Apart from that, I'm ready to listen to any idea you have to make money. You can sell the woods. There's lots of trees in the mountains, 50 hectares, and most of it is a forest. If you want to try to sell timber, you can sell that. Some people had the idea we could sell the water that we have. Others were talking about charcoal burning. Others said, let's increase the amount of cows we have. Let's have 10 cows, and then we can send 10. Then we can sell 10 calves a year. There was also this crazy idea of somewhere digging a hole and asking a nuclear plant if they would be ready to pay us money to deposit their nuclear waste. And people came up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Some of that you will find in the interview. I will post the first question and my kind of long answer to that, so please have fun with that. It's a long chapter, so it's gonna continue for a couple of times, but yeah, today the last part of the Trump of Zen chapter and the first part of the money problem chapter. See you.